is it in California right now?
Oh, I feel like you're setting me up for a Johnny Carson joke with that question. But Bradley, it's very
so
very hot in California.
How hot is it?
How hot is it? I have the kind of an annual tradition, and I forget it every year, that this podcasting closet that I record, because I've got sound foam all around me and moving blankets and books that deaden the sound. So it's nice and quiet in here. Mm-hmm. But it's also the potential to just be a hotbox sweatshop in summer.
Right.
And California is going through a tremendous heat wave at the moment. And oh boy, Brad, I'm already sweating, and it's 9 a.m. in the morning here.
I was just reading that it got near you, not too far from you, it got up to like 131 degrees yesterday. The hottest temperature ever recorded on the globe?
In the history of modern temperature taking. 131 degrees, Brad.
Yeah, and it's hotter today.
Yeah, so today they think it's going to get to 132 out there.
Boy, and that closet, I'm going to guess, has no air conditioner vents, because I know you've got air conditioning, but no vent inside of a closet, right?
It has a lot of older copies of Calvin and Hobbes and Bone, but it does not have any air conditioning.
Very cool reading, but not a lot of cool air.
Brad with the turn of phrase. Nice work. A lot of cool reading, but not a lot of... Yeah.
So Dave, so what did you do to solve this problem? Go ahead. Go ahead. Tell the
Brad,
nice
we
people
don't need
listening.
to tell the nice people
tell
what
the
I did.
nice people listening at home how you're solving this problem.
I should mention to everybody at home that we are on cameras with our new system that we record our podcast so that we can see one another's faces from across the country. And I had to mute my camera for a minute, and Brad goes, "What are you doing?" I go, "It's none of your business what I'm doing." He goes, "Just tell me, why is your camera muted?" And it's because, ladies and gentlemen, I took my dang pants off because it's too hot to podcast with pants on.
We are doing a no pants podcast as far as one half of the team is considered right now.
I contemplated taking my shirt off, but I was like, nobody wants that. Brad doesn't want that on his video screen right now.
It's not like I've never seen a third nipple before, but.
No one wants to see a shirtless Dave. Even my wife, it takes a glass and a half of wine before she wants to see a shirtless Dave.
Right. It's something you got to work up to.
Yeah, you can't just spring that. You got to slowly undo the buttons. Like, let's ease into the thought of it, not...
Yeah, nobody needs that thrust upon them. It's like, all right, you got to warm up to the idea and then bring it up.
My husband might be naked within the next 10 to 20 minutes. I'm not sure. Anyway, so it's going to be a pantless podcast, but don't worry at home. There's no camera recording of the... I'm assuming, Brad, you better not be screen grabbing this.
No. Although I do have to admit, if I'm being honest, it is my goal now to do something to get you to jump up and stand up in front of the camera. Like I've got to find something. Like there's a spider on your shoulder and you jump up.
What in the context... A spider is good. What in the context of podcasting could get me to stand up? Like, Dave, could you demonstrate your standing drawing technique real quick? Yeah, sure, Brad. You just hear me scooch my chair back.
Dave, we've got a new thing here at the ComicLab podcast. I think you'll agree it's the right time to do this. It's the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you would, please...
Oh my God, I did not see that joke coming. I legitimately did not see that coming.
We'll be in the middle of the podcast and I'll just be, oh, say, can you see?
On that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his fully clothed, as far as you know, friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. And if you remember, Brad, a couple weeks ago, we talked about the stats for ComicLab servers, and we were looking at where people were hailing from in the world. And we saw that we had one person, a kind, wonderful person hailing from Singapore listening to the show. And And we kind of made a joke about it. But Brad, we have heard from that kind listener.
That's right. Bob from Singapore, who is not named Bob at all, goes by the nickname Snares, wrote in and wrote us really an absolutely beautiful email that we both enjoyed. But just to kind of give you an idea of where our Singapore listener came from, he says, quote, "I've been a longtime listener and fan of Surviving Creativity, which was a podcast that I did previously with Scott Kurtz. It had been a source of sanity and companionship during the times I was actively developing my own comics. The ComicLab podcast was briefly mentioned by Brad back then, when he was still on Surviving Creativity and doing his zany game shows towards the end of every episode." Oh, Dave, did I ever tell you about the game shows
I listened to those, yeah.
My God, I had so much fun. I had so much fun doing that.
I got to tell you, Brad, listening to them, I could tell you were putting more work into designing those game shows than your comics for that week.
Oh, yes. I did one. Scott and Corey don't even know this, unless their wives told them. I had this idea, and it was all using our software at the time. Remember, you could record something and then make it play at the push of a button. Remember, you used to do that with the doodly-doo-doo-doo?
Yeah.
So I had this idea. I was going to do the Newlywed Game. So I called up Scott's wife, Angela, and I called up Corey's wife, Shayna, and I said, hey, I'm going to do this thing. Keep it a secret from the guys. I'm going to ask you questions. You answer them. I'll record you. I divvied them up into little bits. And then on the show, my plan was to ask Scott a question, get his answer, and then play Angela's answer, and then basically recreate on the fly the Newlywed Game.
Right.
And unfortunately, we fell off and never recorded another podcast after that. But somewhere in my computer, I've got Angela giving 1-sentence answers or 2-sentence answers to questions I've long since forgotten.
I like that you're like, and it only took me 50 hours of work to get that together. So it was well worth it in terms of return on investment.
Yes, talk about getting distracted by shiny objects. Yes.
But before we get too distracted, I want to say thank you to Snares for the kind email. That was really nice. And for the fun facts about Singapore. That was actually legitimately awesome. So thank you for that.
Yes. And now on from something that was a pure delight to something that was not such a delight. Remember on the show back, I think in May, we talked about how you may want to start preparing for a future in which the United States Postal Service does not offer media mail.
Right.
And I'll just, before anybody starts having panic attacks, that has not happened yet. But I actually got pushback on different places. I forget whether it was Twitter or where, but people were like, listen, Brad, you don't have to panic. The United States Postal Service has always announced price increases in October, and then those don't take place until December. You don't have to worry. It's always been that way. You don't have to worry, at least until next year. And because my main thing was, Kickstarter. I don't want to. I've already got my Kickstarter money set aside for a certain amount of postage. If it goes up, I'm in trouble. And I said, listen, I hope you're right. I really hope. I'd love to be wrong in this circumstance, but nothing about the last 3.5 years falls under the heading of this is the way we've always done it.
Right.
There's been a whole truckload of stuff that we've never done before, and I hope I'm wrong. I said back in May. This just in from the United States Postal Service 4 days ago. The post office filed notice with the Postal Regulatory Commission today for a temporary price change to take effect October 18th. Now, this is not going to affect media mail. It is going to affect first class postage. And it takes, oddly enough, it takes place just a couple weeks. It takes place October 18th, which is a couple weeks before something important that's happening. And then expires on the 27th, and it will bump up certain prices. For example, a time-limited price increase on all commercial, domestic, competitive packaging, but retail prices and international prices will be unaffected. It will raise
What could
prices.
be happening on November 3rd, Brad? What could be happening 2 weeks, literally 2 weeks after this
it's
change?
Just a couple weeks before something's happening. I can't remember what.
What could have caused this weird non-linear change that the post office doesn't normally make this way? What could have caused that?
It's going to affect Priority Mail Express, Priority Mail, First Class Package Service, Parcel Select, and Parcel Return Service. So
and ballots. How convenient.
So who knows what's going on there? I don't know. But listen, all of which to say, what do we say on the show every time? Keep your head on a swivel. Be prepared, because if they made this snap judgment, they could be making any number of other snap judgments right on up until there's a change at the post office.
Yeah, and just so folks have a bit of a historical context of media mail and why it's been valuable to the U.S., especially for those living outside of the U.S., it is hard to describe how geographically wide the U.S. is until you drive across it, like if you drive across the 70 or the 40 or the 10.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm one of the lucky, rare people in this world who has driven through all 50 states now, Brad. I got Hawaii a few years ago. That was my last one. And it's a fucking huge country. I'm sorry for cussing, but it's a huge country. And so media mail was really important for a burgeoning democracy because it said, hey, do you live in a farm in Iowa out in the middle of nowhere? You can get books and magazines and records and learn and be a self-taught a polymath, even if you live out in the middle of nowhere with media mail. That was the idea of it, was that as a country, we wanted you to have access to books and magazines and learning materials wherever you were at a reasonable rate. So the Postal Service, under the guidance of the federal government, established media mail as this rate. There's also a library rate, which is even better than media mail, but that's rarer. Anyway, all that's to say, God, I would be really disappointed if, as a country, we got rid of media mail. Separate from my own business interests, Brad, it makes a better democracy to have people be well-read, affordably able to access literature and materials for learning, whether you're in Alaska or Hawaii or Maine or the tip of Florida. It's so helpful. And so, gosh, this is just me putting out into the open that I hope media mail stays, not just for the benefit to our businesses, all of our businesses, but because it's been a bedrock for democracy, and it's a shame to see it go.
And now, speaking as a person that grew up in rural Michigan for 18 years, how nice has it been just to have the post office? Because I know anytime I've got to ship anything up there using any of the commercial couriers like UPS or Federal Express, it's so expensive to get something to the rural parts of the United States. Whereas if I use the post office, it's one flat rate for the most part. You know, I can ship things much more affordably, and especially if it's like a card or something like that, something small. 50 cents will get that piece of mail across the street, or it'll get it across the country in an outlying area, and it doesn't matter which that stamp is going on. When you stop and think about it, that's pretty freaking amazing.
Oh, Brad, you and I, remember we had a phone conversation about this the other day, Brad. We were talking about that you and I can mail to the most remote part of Alaska, same price as to mail down the street. That's, logistically speaking, that's amazing, you know?
Yes.
And I'm always confounded when people are like, yeah, but the post office is not making money. They're not supposed to make money. They're a service.
Guess what? The Army doesn't make money either.
Yeah.
The Navy doesn't make money. These guys, I'm not saying they don't do an important job. That's not on the table. But do they generate a profit? No. By the way, government agencies aren't. The Veterans Administration doesn't generate a profit. It's not supposed to. It's a government agency. It's there to help people.
I know. So to me, it's a historical shame to see the post office being picked apart, because it's one of the things that the U.S. did really well in its development. Yeah. Really well. Like, we have legitimately one of the best I mean, I know it's beat up. I know we haven't put money into it since the 70s for the most part. But it's still working really well, given how creaky it is and how we're asking it to overfund its pension program right now. That's more politics than everybody wants. But I was going to say, we don't want to go down too far this road. But if you're like my in-laws waiting for prescription medication that's coming through the mail, this is a real important thing. This has never been an issue that, oh, geez, my heart medication isn't here yet. I hope it comes here pretty soon. That's never been an issue before. Right. And so all of this is to say, let's bring it back to comics, is that, like Brad said, we wouldn't normally say, hey, you know what might completely fall apart, the U.S. Postal Service? We're kind of saying, hey, you know what might fall apart, the Postal Service?
Yeah.
And so just keep an awareness of this on your radar if you ship a lot, as Brad and I do for your businesses, that this tremendous service that has lasted 200 plus years might a little bit start to get creakier as we get closer and closer to the election for reasons that are obvious to everybody.
Yes.
And so, Brad, let's move on to the next one.
I've got one more piece of news for you.
Okay.
You ready? Are you ready for one more piece of news?
What? Yeah, you have a look on your face like this is serious. Are you pregnant?
Dave, I got a plus sign.
Brad, I just get a voicemail from Brad on my phone. It's like, Dave, 2 things. Yes, and we need to talk.
No, it's not quite that bad, but this literally just came up on my email. I can't not talk about it, but we've got no prep on it, so I'm just going to hit you from nowhere on this and see what your reaction is. I just got an email, literally, from Patreon, and it says, creators have asked for this for years, and now it's here. What do you guess it is?
I don't know. Go ahead.
Okay. They are going to unveil annual membership.
Annual membership. Okay.
Yeah, listen to this. This is coming from Patreon. Our research shows that a third of your patrons, the real MVPs, want to pay you annually. Annual membership lets you reward your most loyal patrons, grow your membership, and achieve your goals faster. It's a win-win. And they go on to say it just takes a minute to enable, blah, blah, blah. But basically, when somebody becomes an annual member at a certain tier, they're locked into that tier for the entire year. They only have to pay you one time. What do you think, Dave Kellett?
Wow. Okay. So my first blush thoughts are that I bet if I were to drill down into the math on this, that much like the transition from saying, hey, your baseline Patreon level should be $1. Now it should be $2, and here's the math to prove why your baseline level should be $2. My initial reaction to that was, I don't like change. I don't want this. Don't make me do anything to my Patreon. It's working fine. But then once I realized the math of the $2 being the base level and why that works out, even if you have less people paying, I was fine with it. So my first blush reaction is, annual memberships. I don't know about this. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I bet, though, if I stop and think about it, the true, like they said, the true MVPs that have stuck with me now for, like, let's take Drive, for example. I think that's had a Patreon going for 3-4 years now. And there have been people that have stuck around for for years on end. But the question is, how do you non-awkwardly transition them to be like, hey, so you've been paying a lot of money monthly. How do you feel about paying a lot of money annually? Would that be better? Like, sometimes I feel like, and Brad, you can correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes I feel like it's best to use the 24-hour fitness model in the sense that once you've signed up for the gym, they don't mention it ever again because it's just quietly going on your credit card as you don't go to the gym, you know?
Absolutely.
And
Set
so
it and forget it.
I a little bit don't want to rock the boat with existing patrons and be like, so, hey, you've given me hundreds of dollars over the years. Now would you like to sign up to immediately give me $100 for the next year? I don't think that's wisdom, but maybe there is wisdom if it's possible, and I haven't read this email that you're telling me about. Is it possible to set it up so just new people would get that option, or?
I don't know. So here's the deal. I'll tell you how I envision myself using it, and that is I'll probably switch over for the option and never mention it. Because I agree the set it and forget it model is much, much stronger. In fact, to the extent I may have mentioned this once on ProTips, because this is a part that I'm reticent to share because it sounds Machiavellian, but I rarely make a Patreon post towards the end of the month because the last thing I want to do is remind people to second guess whether they want to be a Patreon backer or not. You know, at that very end of the month, the last thing I want to do is remind people I'm there.
Right. And by the way, for everyone following along at home, that's why Brad also takes a quick out-of-town trip for a week before his wedding anniversary every year.
Yes.
Just so his wife doesn't wake up to the terrible reality she's in. Like, she just, you know.
I don't want her to realize I'm still there.
Yeah, like she's like, why am I so happy? Oh, that man is gone.
Yeah. I must. She equates happiness with wedding anniversary. I win. So, but no, I don't like reminding people of their subscription. All I want is for them to keep getting a metric ton of stuff from me through the month, post after post after post. I want them to keep getting positive feedback. I don't want it. But that's it. I don't want. Once you get them to sign up, you never want to mention money again. Right?
Yeah, kind of. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm going to go look at this email after the show is over. It'll be interesting to see if they allow us to change this setting in a way that it doesn't immediately notify everybody. You know what I mean? Like, that's my fear.
Yeah.
If I change the setting, are they immediately going to send out some automated email to everybody going, hi, it's Patreon, and your artist has changed their settings, that kind of thing.
Yeah, because people get nervous about changes anyway.
That's what I mean. Like, you don't want to make them nervous at all right now with any more change. We've already...
Right.
The Postal Service is enough. We've talked about
Lots of changes. Here's two other ways that I think I think it's probably a good idea when they say a third of your patrons, say they want to pay you one time. That goes back to the Geiger's Law of Merchandise. People always say they want that comic on a T-shirt too, and they really don't.
Yeah.
But Patreon's research is better than my dopey little market research. Let's put that on the top. But here's two ways that I think that this might not be so great. In a couple of ways. Number one, you've got a situation where, okay, let's say Joe Schmo, the cartoonist, has a Patreon and somebody becomes their annual backer for, let's say, $10 a month. They pay $120. And in March, Joe Schmo loses their mojo. Real world got in the way. They're not feeling it, and they stop posting content.
Right.
Now, or maybe Joe gets hit by a bus and sprained his drawing hand for a couple of weeks and can't draw.
Wait, what is that series of events? He gets hit by a bus and sprains his hand? All right.
Well, he
Keep
gets
going.
hit
I don't
by
want to
a
derail
bus.
you.
Yes, but he just got hit a glancing blow. But then
where was he going that he was not paying attention to a 40-ton object coming at him?
I don't know where he was going. Say, can you see?
Immediately standing up.
Just the only way I could think of to get out of that. So anyway, so what happens when all of a sudden the Patreon backer or the Patreon creator isn't posting stuff, but that person paid back in January, it's only March, and they feel cheated now. That comes back and reflects badly on Patreon. So that's one maybe.
Let me yes and you on that. Yeah. Here's the flip side of that, Brad, as we head into the worst recession possible, or depression for 100 years.
Yeah.
Is someone is flying high in their job, they're doing great, and they pledge it, whatever it is, 100, let's just say $100 for fun. It's $50, who cares? They pledge it $50 for fun, and then they get laid off massively 2 months into this thing, right? Mm-hmm. And they're like, hey, it just renewed like 2 weeks ago. Is there any way you could refund me? Now, how does that benefit anybody in this situation? Right. It's awkward for the patron. It's awkward and possibly impossible for the artist to be refunding cash. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't serve anyone. Whereas smaller incremental payments, I feel like the average person would be less likely to be like, I really need a refund, Brad. Can you refund that money to me?
Yeah, and I'll give you one other. And actually, I was just talking about this to my wife the other night over dinner. We were reminiscing, about the old days and everything. And but when you worked your day job, did you get paid every week or every other week?
My day job?
Back at Mattel.
Mattel was every other week, I think.
When I first started working in newspapers, I got a weekly paycheck. It was great. Weekly pay, and I was a young single guy out on the town, had no life whatsoever.
Imagine a young single Brad out on the town. Imagine those plaid pants and they didn't go all the way down to the socks.
Imagine me going without a care through the McDonald's drive-thru and then right back home.
Why, yes, I will go to the comic book shop again. I'm 24-year-old Brad Geiger.
But it was great. I had no expenses. Certainly no dating to take up any
Sure,
amount
there's
of,
no distraction there. That's
yeah.
great.
So it was great, and I got a weekly paycheck. And I was telling Carolyn, I still remember when my boss came to me and said, we're switching to a biweekly, every other week paycheck. And I said, speaking of being upset by change, I'm like, oh, this is terrible. He's like, nah, you'll get used to it. It's the same amount of money. You just get it every other month. You just budget accordingly, and it's fine. And very quickly, even right up until finally in 2012, I left newspapers, and I was still getting paid every other week. In 2012, my wife and I had Roman weeks and Spartan weeks. Right? The week you got paid was a Roman week, right? Then it was like you lived like a Roman. This was fantastic, bacchanalia. The week after, where you didn't get a paycheck, was a Spartan week. No extras, behave yourself, walk in a straight line, get to the next week, and the next week it's a Roman week, and we're bacchanalia again. All of which to say, when you get paid on a sporadic basis like that, you can tell yourself it's the same amount of money, but meting it out and budgeting it out over 12 months for an annual idea, that may not be as easy as you think it is.
Yeah, it's true. It's a little bit like people's inability to budget for taxes when they forget that the X amount is going to come due, once a year or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. I don't know. However, let's argue from the positive side of things.
Yes.
You're locking somebody in, right? Like with this argument of like the 24-hour fitness model, you are locking somebody in for a year. That's a nice big chunk of change that you have up front for a year that they might have changed their mind 3, 4, 5, 6 months in,
Perhaps. Now let me play devil's advocate. You do the set it and forget it, and it's a small amount that comes out of their bank account, and they never really notice it.
Right.
On an annual membership, you got them for that year, but now what happens the year after that? All of a sudden, I'm sure Patreon's going to give them a heads up. Hey, let's say you're at my $10 level for a year. They give you a little heads up. Hey, in a couple weeks, just to let you know, we're going to hit you for another $120. Now, instead of deciding if I'm going to, or actually, not my readers are not making a monthly decision to stick around. Again,
right.
It's that subscription model, set it and forget it. Now, all of a sudden, you've got somebody saying, do I really want to spend another $120 on Brad Geiger?
Yeah. And so do you think there would be a heads up? That's a legitimate question.
I think they'd have to, especially for an annual membership, because otherwise they're just creating problems for themselves if they don't. Because what's going to happen is they're going to have a bunch of bounced payments, declined payments, and a bunch of pissed off people who are like, I forgot I signed up for this.
Right. There's also, Brad, this to consider was fraud has been built into the credit card system such that the credit card companies would rather send you a replacement card, pay for the fraud themselves, than to build a better system that doesn't allow for fraud, right? It's actually cheaper to allow fraud to happen.
Yeah.
And so what I'm getting at here is that now I think most of us within a 2-year period have one credit card that's resent to us on average. Wouldn't you say, Brad? Given fraud and hacking in the U.S. So my thought is most people are going to make it through the year and have the same card the next year. But there will be a percentage of people that will have to physically go in and update their card. And at that point, you're going to have a lot of people going, $120 for Brad Geiger? I don't know, know?
Yeah, the last thing you want is people making decisions.
So I guess the more we talk about this, I'm genuinely not sure. I think I like you. I think I will set it. And then I think I will not mention it to anybody. I won't promote it.
Yeah.
It'll be an option,
Yeah, it's ticklish. It's ticklish because if something happens, I mean, even for people like you and I, we've been doing this for a long time. But that's not saying that something's not going to happen next year and I'm going to come down with crippling arthritis and not be able to produce. I got to be honest with you, and it might be just my own resistance to change. I like the month to month a lot better, even though, it means that we end up living month to month. But I don't think we're that different than the average American in that regard either.
Well, and also I wonder if one last thing before we close up this topic is how would it change your Patreon activity or the way you handle Patreon, Brad, as a creator, if right now you already kind of go radio silent for a couple of days before the bill comes due every month, right? Just to not remind people. But knowing that Steve and Marianne's annual membership were about to renew next week, it might change you, Brad, how you interact with Steve and Marianne. Like, hey, Steve and Marianne, just hope you're enjoying Patreon.
Just wanted to drop your line, say I think you're great.
You're
wonderful.
I mean, maybe that is what would happen if we adopted this kind of model, is that you would have more outreach, like, hey, just checking in, making sure everything's good with you and how are the little ones? All the credit cards are updated.
So I can put you down on your form by saying you're very happy with your Patreon. Can I put down very happy? Can I write that down? You're very happy, very, very happy.
So would you describe? Yeah, exactly. Would you describe yourself as happy or very happy?
I've got to put something down here.
Listen, there's only the two slots here. I'm just giving what they gave me.
Let's go with very happy.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
So, Dave, this show, like so many shows in the past and so many shows in the future, brought to you by our good friends at Wacom, the makers of the Wacom One over at wacom.com.
And Brad, the Wacom One, you can see it actually in use in my studio, as I posted a time lapse recently on my Twitter feed showing how I draw a Sheldon. And then what's fun is you can see the time lapse of my colorist, Beth, who did a fantastic job with a time lapse on the Wacom One, showing how her process works as the 1-2 punch of the studio in action there. And it's kind of fun to see.
That's so great. That's the first thing I noticed, is that Beth was using that Wacom One and getting wonderful results out of it. Had she been using that Wacom One all along?
Well, no, but what happened is a competitive product, Brad. This is not some kind of paid thing. It actually broke on her.
So it wasn't very competitive
I was like, well, guess
all.
what? You're taking the Wacom One, and it's been working out great for the studio that we've had that extra one there.
So now you're down a lot. We got to get Wacom One we got to get Wacom to send us some more ones.
I am not looking a gift horse in the mouth. I'm saying that it has been a godsend to our studio.
Yes.
And so we thank them for their sponsorship over at Wacom at wacom.com, the makers of the new Wacom One. And Bradley J. Geiger, one thing I should mention before we get too far into the show is that I am in probably, based on the timeline here of the recording of this episode, I'm probably in the last week of kickstarting my 2 new Sheldon books at one low price over at newsheldonbook.com. And I would genuinely love it if you are a ComicLab listener to go over and check out the books. If you've never gotten a Sheldon book before, these are going to be gigantic. They're going to be 432 pages. We've made some stretch goals to add a bunch of stuff into the books physically at no additional cost to you. So over at newsheldonbooks.com, you can get 2 116, sorry, Daddy's good at math, Brad, 216-page books, 432 pages total, at one low price over at newsheldonbook.com.
That's fantastic. I will be heading over to newsheldonbook.com just to see how you're doing, because I've been following this Kickstarter, and I'm thrilled to see the results. 216 pages. That's a nice, hefty book.
That is a double the size of my previous books, and so it'll be fun to see how, and they're going to look beautiful. So the cover work looks fantastic. The interiors look fantastic. There's a bunch of physical things that we've unlocked in the books for stretch goals, And so I really am happy with and proud of how they're going to turn out. So head over to newshelterbook.com and check out the new books in this last week of the Kickstarter. And Bradley, we got a question from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Have you ever been up to Nova Scotia, Brad?
Never been to Nova Scotia. I
Have
hear
you been
it's
to
beautiful.
Canada? I know you've been to Canada because I've been to Calgary with you.
Oh yeah, because living in Michigan, we just went across the bridge. We would go across. That's where my bachelor party was, I think. But at any rate, yeah, we've gone across the bridge all the time. But I don't know that I've been to Nova Scotia.
I like that. If you're from Michigan, Canada is known for its bachelor parties. Apparently, is that what you do? You go across?
Back in the day. Yes.
What's the thinking there? Like, well, if I get arrested, it's not in a U.S. jail.
I think, without getting too much into detail, I think some of the gentlemen's clubs had some different rules than the ones. And also, if you lived in Bad Axe, there wasn't a gentlemen's club. There were precious few gentlemen. But yeah, they had different rules over in Canada.
My bachelor party was at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Do you know what that is?
Are you serious?
Yep, I did not want anything traditional. I wanted it's probably on brand for a Dave Kellett bachelor party to be at Six Flags.
Six Flags Magic Mountain.
I had so much fun. I just rode roller coasters all day with all the guys in my life. It was really fun.
That is very sweet.
It's very sweet. Anyway, from Halifax writes, I'm not very confident in my use of sound effects. How often do you think they should be used, and for what kinds of things? Things like water running or door slamming seem obvious, but what about things like fast running? Would you add a zoom? Does Spider-Man go thwip every single time he shoots a web? Or should we let the drawing speak for itself, or is it just personal preference? Brad, this is a question that I don't think we've ever gotten before, is how little, how much, and when to use sound effects. And by sound effects, we mean the written word, the onomatopoeia in the comic. Brad, what are your thoughts?
I will tell you from personal experience that my work I leveled up my comics. I can go back and see when I made the decision that I was ignoring it. And I leveled up my comics the day that I decided to stop ignoring sound effects. Because again, people, especially people like us, we're so concentrated, especially comic strip people or people with that in their backgrounds, we're so concentrated on the punchline and the writing and stuff like that and the drawing that sometimes sound effects get left behind.
Right.
But particularly for Evil Ink and After Dark, once I started paying attention to sound effects and not using every single thing has a sound effect. If you're doing a sound effect in every panel, that might get a little bit oppressive for the reader. But taking and using judicious use of sound effects, once I started doing that, my work took a huge leap forward because I look back at some of my earlier stuff, and I realized my stuff was really quiet, and as a result, it was reading quiet.
Huh. So do you look back on your older work and go, I wish we had a bloop here. I really wish there was a fazang here.
I really do. It reads quiet to me. And a lot of my comics are not meant to be quiet comics. This whole idea of let the drawing speak for itself, no. So if you let the drawing speak for itself, you wouldn't have word balloons. You need word balloons, so you need sound effects.
This is interesting. This is something where I think you and I are going to fall down on different angles on this because I think it is far easier to overuse sound effects than it is to underuse them. I should say misuse. It's far easier to misuse the overuse of sound effects than it is to misuse the underuse. Good God. David, this is English. This is David. You're going to be working together. Anyway, what I'm getting at is I would err on the side of less sound effects, use them sparingly, and when you do use them, they have incredible force because you haven't used them that often,
Do you feel that way more so with Sheldon or more so with Drive or with both?
That is a good question. I can think of one drive in specific where a sound effect actually was the punchline. The punch word was the sound effect. And I think because I don't use them that often, they have more of a punch. But I wonder if I'm fooling myself that I don't use them that often. I do in battle scenes with Drive. There's definitely sound effects. And so I wonder if it's how kinetic your storyline is. If you have a slice of life comic about a bachelor living with his grandmother, there's not going to be a lot of sound effects in that.
Right.
But if you're writing The Thing taking on Hulk, there's going to be a lot of clangs and fa-bang, wong, that kind of thing.
Kathoom. Yeah, that's why I wanted to ask, because for a comic strip, like a 3-panel or 4-panel comic strip, I could totally sign on to the idea that sound effects are somewhat less important, and it would be very easy to have too many. For a more long form storytelling, whether it's humor, drama, sci-fi, romance, or what, for a longer form storytelling, now I think that you should. What?
You said romance, and my mind immediately was like, wait, what sound effects would you ever want in a romance comic?
I was trying to be polite about it, but Evil Link After Dark took a big step forward when I started adding more sound effects.
Stop the conversation. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. I'm out. This is the guy that went on his bachelor party to Six Flags Magic Mountain. I don't want to know.
It did. What am I going to tell you? It did. But I think this might be one of those rare instances where I would say that the rules break down, and I put rules in quote marks, break down a little bit differently between a comic strip and a long form. I think long form, you can be more free with that seasoning, whereas in a strip, maybe you're going to ratchet it back a little bit.
Can I express something that I think is probably true? You know how you can hold two opposing opinions and they can both be true for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I want to say this. The moments where I do use, hold on, let me put it this way. When I'm logically thinking about comics, I feel like too many sound effects, the overuse of sound effects, and sometimes even just the generic use of sound effects, kind of infantilizes a comic. It brings it down in terms of mood and age. It doesn't feel as serious and doesn't feel as, and maybe that's okay. But what I'm saying is, it makes it feel more like a Sesame Street kind of feeling than something else, right? So I hold that feeling on one side, and then on the other side, I know that with both Sheldon, my Gag-A-Day strip, and Drive, my somewhat serious but also humorous long-form sci-fi strip, the moments where I do use sound effects have been the most joy-filled in my cartooning, right? So have brought me joy, and I know have brought my readers joy based on their reactions to it. So I think I have two opposing thoughts on this that are both equally true, that a little bit I feel like it's too easy to overuse sound effects, and that it a little bit infantilizes a comic or a comic. And then the other is also true, that I'm like, well, of course you want to infantilize it. It's joy. Let that happen,
Yeah. Let yourself have the freedom to be silly. Because not nobody, but I don't know about you. I don't know that I like reading serious comics. I like reading fun comics.
Brad, I'm forgetting the name of the term. The kind of Haight-Ashbury comics that came out of San Francisco, the R. Crumb and that kind of stuff, but also the Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers and that kind
comics
of stuff.
With an X.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I forgot that they were called comics with an X.
Yeah.
I remember that all those kind of weed-infused comics way overused sound effects. Every foot was a squish, squish, squish as it walked through the rain.
Yep.
Opening up a drawer was a schwack. Everything.
Even if somebody sliced bread, that had a sound effect.
Yeah, and also coming a very different cartoonist, but also, frankly, in the same vein as those head comics was Don Martin of Mad Magazine.
Absolutely, the king of onomatopoeia.
Right, and don't get me wrong, when I was 9, nobody loved Don Martin more than Dave Kellett. I thought he was a brilliant cartoonist. But I guess what I'm saying is, as an adult now, I think of too much onomatopoeia as being for comics for a 9-year-old, Like Don Martin is not written for a 65-year-old. Don Martin is written for a 9-year-old.
I think the bottom line here, let me see if I can find some common ground. Sound effects are good, but like any good thing, you have to use them with judgment and moderation. It's sound effects is like a seasoning in a recipe. I love fresh cracked pepper. Love. But if I put too much on it, it starts to cake up in my teeth. I've got all this pepper in my mouth. You can use too much of a good thing. I think we do need to remember that we have sound effects in our bag of tricks, because I think it gets lost a lot. But like you say, it is something that you can overuse.
Yeah, you know what? I think as far as netting out from this conversation, I think you have hit on it, which is, of course it's valuable. Yes, of course it's valuable. Can it be overused and abused? Of course, yes. Like anything, it can be overused and abused. So, like anything you do in any part of your art, learn to control it, learn to use it to best effect, sprinkle it in when it's best appropriate, and avoid it when it's clearly not matching the mood and the tone of that moment in the comic. So yeah. I think you're right, Brad. And so I'm going to jump us into our next question, Brad, coming in from Lindsay Hornsby over at patreon.com/ComicLab. And it says, I have worked on a comic about a little girl who wanted to take over the world. I had rebooted it after advice from Brad in a consultation, fixed a lot of the story issues, and enjoyed the direction it was going.
Yeah, I remember this.
2016 happened, and I had a growing concern by 2017 that the subject matter of a kid who wanted world domination was too close to real-world issues of the rise of authoritarian states, which is, as we all know, is happening all over the world at the moment. The comic itself is very silly, Saturday morning style, and the overall theme is friendship, but I've had trouble going back to it based on the state of the world. I worry the main character's goals, though presented in a silly manner, will send the wrong message. Having taken a break from it, I would like to finish it, but my original concern about the current state of the world is exponentially bigger. Are there times as a cartoonist where it's best that a certain subject matter or storylines are avoided until current events are less volatile, or am I being overly anxious about my comic? So, Brad, this is fundamentally a question about politics in comics and comics in politics and vice. You know what I mean? The dance of whether to avoid or include the current world and the state of, broadly speaking, politics in your life.
Well, we've got two issues here. One is the specific, and one is the general. Okay. Because they're two different things. Lindsay is overthinking it. Lindsay's got no problems as far as I'm concerned. Nobody's going to take this idea of a little girl who wants to be in control of the world and think that that's a commentary on authoritarian politics that are going, as you noted, in different places around the world. Nobody's gonna make that connection. And this whole idea of I want to take over the world is almost to the point of being a comic trope. Right. That was at the beginning of every episode of Pinky and the Brain.
Right.
It's been at the heart of any number of supervillain stories, either serious or humorous. This whole idea of I want to take over the world and I'm doing these things to achieve world domination are so firmly embedded in the idea of trope that I can say confidently that Lindsay is overthinking this. And by the way, I'm not putting you down because given the amount of things that are happening in the world right now, I think a lot of us are thinking more than we used to think. And that's maybe a good thing. But no, Lindsay, you're overthinking this. You go ahead with that story. It was a delightful story. When I read it, it's gotten nothing but better and better every time I checked in on it. You keep writing that kid's story. It's a delight. Now, in general, Dave, let's not speak about this one person, but in general, it raises a much bigger point, which, as you point out, should one actively try to kind of take a step away from politics until things blow over, I guess.
Right. So what's interesting, I got to comment on this because it was sort of funny that it popped into my brain. You were listing out comics that had used the trope of like, I'm going to conquer the world today. And Pinky and the Brain is the best example of that. And then you went on to list other comics. And for some reason, my brain wanted to chime in and go, and Swiper from Dora the Explorer. And I have no idea why Swiper popped into my mind. He doesn't actively want to conquer the world. He just wants to steal shit. And I don't know why I thought of Swiper.
Well, you got really wound up about Swiper. I don't know what this is.
Well, I got to tell you, when I was a parent of young kids, I would always be like, oh, you son of a bitch. Here he comes again. Dora, he's right there. Dora, God, all that.
He's right there.
Somebody get a shotgun. That damn Swiper. Because, as a parent, you have to play those mental games with yourself to keep yourself entertained.
Oh, yeah.
There were certain shows that I enjoyed as a parent. Like, for whatever reason, I loved Octonauts. I think those were after your phase,
Yeah,
Brad.
that was after us.
I loved the animation stuff. But anyway, Swiper would always be like, oh, God damn it, here he comes again. Dora, how are you letting this happen? Dora, do not let this man into your life. Anyway, so that was my go to nowhere comment that's not helpful at all to Lindsay. But so as far as politics go, I will be honest, Brad, that my own personal attitude has changed.
Yeah.
And so why not take people on this journey? When I was a younger cartoonist, I always listened, as most of us did, to Charles Schulz. And Charles Schulz famously said, the day I include politics in Peanuts is the day I lose 50% of my audience. No matter what the topic is, I lose 50% of my audience is the day I include politics. Which, of course, did not preclude him from choosing to include religion in his comic, which one could argue is also similarly polarizing. Yeah. But he made his choice, right? That was his line in the sand.
Right.
And so for me as a young cartoonist, and frankly for a lot of North American cartoonists, Charles Schulz was kind of like the bellwether, wouldn't you say, Brad? Of like, no, I'm just doing social commentary or slice of life or family fun.
Right.
I'm not introducing politics. Whereas I think more... the dabbling I get of British comics especially and some French comics, that politics trickle in a little bit more frequently than they do in North American comics. That's my thought. And we've also, to the point that American comics separated them out. Like Doonesbury literally appears on a separate page than everybody else. Our political comics literally appear on a separate page.
In many newspapers, yes. Yeah.
Even though there's no reason why, it was always under the auspices of, will no one think of the children? like, let's keep the kids away from the politics kind of stuff.
It was because of timid newspaper editors. Let's be honest about it.
But I mention all that because that informed my journey and a lot of people's journey. And for me, I want to be honest. I grew up in a place of privilege as a straight white guy that never really had to think about politics and like in terms of being an existential threat to my life or my family's life or that kind of thing. And so for me, and we might as well say it, I am the opposite of a Trump fan. And 2016 was a bellwether for me of like, oh shit, democracy is something that actively has to be defended. And I'm nervous about this. And how do I start to incorporate politics into my life or into my comics? And I, having done Sheldon for so long, there was no real good way to start suddenly working it in. Yeah. It's like when BC, the comic strip about prehistoric man, suddenly is like, and Jesus was born. And you're like, wait, what's happening in this comic? How is this possible?
BC, it's right there in the title, before Christ.
Yeah. I mean, Johnny Hart, bless him. Great. You had your moment on the road to Damascus. I get it. But it doesn't fit with your comic strip. What are you doing, Yeah. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. What I'm saying is I have had a change of heart, and I'm no longer as shy, I guess is one way of saying, about introducing politics into my social sphere. I have yet to successfully, although I will say this, Brad, this is maybe helpful. I have definitely written more of an autocratic, dictatorial theme in Drive in terms of people's reaction to it than I would have done because of Trump's rise. And I've actively been trying to tell people that this is not the route you want to go,
Right. Yeah.
And so anyway, what are your thoughts, Brad? I spoke way too long. What are your thoughts about sprinkling politics in general into your comics, or about sprinkling it in this present moment into your comics?
Well, I've always kind of moderated politics into Evil Inc. Like, I've never been overt and said, this is bad, this person or this party is bad, this is good. But I have talked about ideas an awful lot and shown, that certain ideas have certain outcomes and so forth. So I haven't, I haven't shied away from it, but I've also haven't been heavy-handed about it either.
Right.
In general, what our listeners need to know is that any action they take here is going to have a consequence, right? If they actively go out and talk about politics, that's going to have a consequence,
right?
And they have to be honest with themselves about what that consequence is. Conversely, if they don't talk about politics. That has consequences too.
Right.
So you've got, and so both of those sides may make you uneasy and make you uncomfortable. But there is no such thing as not making a comment, because the lack of a comment is a comment. And
Right.
and it's as you pointed out, being two straight white guys, the fact that we even have the ability to say, well, I may or may not make a comment is privilege. You know,
Absolutely.
there's an awful lot of people walking their walks who don't have that choice because,
Right.
again, like you point out, it's a perfect word. It's an existential threat to them. So they
Right.
don't have that that ability to say, well, maybe I will, maybe I won't. The only advice I can offer is, as you're making, I can't tell you the right decision to make for you. You know, it's something that, like Dave, you know, I question myself from week to week about you know, how I'm behaving in that sphere. In terms of you, person listening to this podcast, it's this: everything that you're gonna decide is going to have a consequence, and just be honest with yourself about what those consequences are, and
Right.
if you can, if you're prepared for that, and if you're prepared to have the consequences of not saying anything.
Right. Right. And part of that is playing the little mental game of, would I be angrier with myself if I spoke up, or
Yeah.
angrier with myself if I went quiet, you know?
Right.
And I, coming from my background, shame and guilt are incredibly good motivators for how you go through your life. I find that thinking about like whether I will be angrier if I did not speak up, or angrier if I stayed quiet. You know, either one of those paths is a helpful indicator and bellwether. And for me, it has tilted towards, I would be angrier if I didn't speak up. Now, here's the follow-up thought to that, Brad, which is, I think people overestimate how much one social media post, 40 social media posts, 1,000 social media posts impact anybody else's opinion. I think the truth of it is that you can, in subtle ways, nudge people. It's really hard to actually change someone's opinion.
Yep.
And you're really inflating your sense of place in the world if you're like, if I just make this one tweet, everyone will see, and then I will have saved America and democracy, you know?
Right. No, I've yet to see somebody really have their mind changed because of a snarky tweet. I honestly try to avoid that on social media for two reasons. I'll tell you, I kind of feel strongly about this. Number one, I've never seen somebody actually have their mind changed by a tweet or a post on social media.
Right.
In fact, what happens is that other person on the other side digs in even harder, and you're just nothing constructive happens. It's useless. It really is a useless endeavor. And as a co-signer on to point number one, I find myself actively either muting or unfollowing people who are sharing too much political stuff, because half the time I'm coming on to social media to avoid that. I want a happy place to go.
Yeah.
It's why I've done Instagram and Imager much more than Twitter in the last few months, because I want to just go and feel good for a little bit.
Right.
All right.
Yeah,
I just want to feel good. And I don't. And yes, I know that this thing happened earlier today, and it was a horrible thing. And I know all the reasons that it's horrible. And I know a number of reactions to how horrible it is. And some of them are funny and some of them are touching and so on and so forth. I don't need it from you too. And so I end up just either muting or disconnecting, because it's like, if you're going to keep putting this stuff in front of me, you're making my experience not so happy, and I don't want it. Now, I'm going to just go on to number two, because number one, sharing that makes me sound like a really small person. I'm going to tell you why I feel about number one. It's because I also feel this way about number two. Every time you do that, like Dave just said, I'm going to save the world with a tweet. Every time you do that, you're not doing something significant. In other words, I don't do political tweets, but I do call my congressperson. I don't do political tweets, but I have shown up at marches. I don't do political tweets, but I give money to causes I think are good. And I really do think that the more you do of the first, like slacktivism, right? Well, I never signed those online petitions. Online petitions are good for shit as far as I'm concerned, right?
Right.
And it makes you think you're actually doing something. That's the real danger, because you're doing nothing. So I don't do any of that. I reserve my energy for the things that I think are actually purposeful, things that have effect, like calling your member of Congress. That's something that has been shown, especially if you know the right ways, and there's lots of guides out there, the right way to contact somebody. Those have effect. Convincing yourself that a tweet is taking place in the process is dangerous.
Yeah, because it's a little bit like putting the onus on everyone else to save the world, when really your actual physical steps could have been taken rather than just sending that tweet out into the universe. Yeah. What's funny too is, Brad, I often find that I mute people with whom their opinion I already agree with. So it's not even like, I don't agree with Brad. Brad's got a very different set of opinions. I don't want to hear these. I'm going to mute him. Sometimes it's like, yeah, Brad's a dear friend. I love him tremendously. I agree on probably 90% of his politics. I still don't want to hear it from Brad. I'm going to mute him if he's going to go on this tirade all day,
I co-signed 100%.
And so let's take that into comics, because I actually feel like, and this goes to Lindsay's question, one of the things that comics do really well is provide a bubble escapism, where you can enter this small bubble of a world where there are certain rules and certain expectations and certain understandings, where that world makes sense and it's fun to be there. And that's why people go there, And so part of the problem with when you suddenly introduce politics, or in BC's case with Johnny Hart, when you suddenly introduce religion that chronologically couldn't even have been possible in that strip, people go, well, wait a minute, this is not the rules and understandings and expectations that I came to this bubble universe escapism for. Now it's changed, and now I don't want to be there,
Yeah. And going back to what you opened up this conversation with, Schultz was kind of full of bunk, and I'll tell you why. In other words, he says, well, if I bring politics into the comic, then I lose 50%. I get that, but that was the same guy that introduced a black character to his cast, knowing full well that a bunch of papers, particularly in the South, were going to rebel against it. And when his syndicate said, we don't think this is a good idea, we're going to lose a bunch of Southern newspapers, his response was, that's great. I've got this other syndicate I was thinking about working with anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, he just put it right on the table, the way I read it, very matter-of-factly, and said, if you don't think this is a good idea, I'll just go with another syndicate, and I'll take all those newspapers with me, even if I drop a few Southern ones. That was a political act.
You're 1,000% correct, and B, that took courage on his part, because I've read some of the letters that he's gotten, having gone to the Schultz Museum. When he introduced Franklin, it was ridiculous, especially from the South, the letters that he got. And some of his responses were on fire, and you should read them.
Yeah.
They're delightful letters back to these people. But so yes, and then the corollary here, Brad, is it not politics if you think that your opinion is the way it should be? Do you know what I mean? Like, did Schultz, to him, that wasn't politics, because yes, it should just be that we treat our fellow human beings with respect and kindness. Right. And yes, we should be, religion should be XYZ. And so none of that is politics, because yes, that's just the way it should be. Right. And maybe that's a corollary to, is, am I introducing political thought into my comics, is some of these people, it's like, it's not politics. This is just the way the world should be.
Right. Yeah, I think he was plenty political. It's just that he basically never came out and said, I'm for this party, but there was all kinds of politics in the background.
Yeah, and especially themes and through lines of like how humans should act and how society should function, and what level of concern and kindness we should have for the people that are going through this life with us, And all of that is ultimately, there's an entire train of thought that every act is political, every thought is political, because it all has and so really it comes down to how your level of comfort, your level of shame or regret that would come from saying or not saying something, and then the counterbalancing thing of what expectations have you built with your audience about that level of discourse coming in. And frankly, I think both Brad and I and history would say the more the more artfully that you can introduce it in with themes and character arcs, rather than going, "Hey, everybody, we're stopping today's comic because we need to say that the Postal Service needs to be saved." And
right.
That's not artful. Like sometimes, yes, a sledgehammer is warranted, but a more artful way can sometimes have a better impact on people longer term, I think.
Absolutely. Oh, and one thing I got to say at this point too is, Dave, there's a spider on your shoulder.
I'm standing up.
Doesn't that make you want to just stand up?
Brad, you're not getting any extra vitamin D today. I'm not standing up.
Well, if you refuse to stand, all I've got to say about that is that you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and there's a mouse, living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my friend Dave Kellett, Dapper Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com, Drive at drivecomic.com, and don't miss newsheldonbook.com. That Kickstarter is just into its last days. You've only got a few more hours to jump aboard, and from what I've seen, there's a lot of great rewards.
And I will say, this is a great place to jump in with Sheldon books. They do not need to be read sequentially. And again, 432 pages at one price. I hope you will consider it. And once again, the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And ComicLab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/ComicLab. So we'll go ahead and say that like Brad Geiger seeing me stand up in this booth. Oh my God, patreon.com/ComicLab. Or maybe your reaction would be, oh my goodness, patreon.com/ComicLab. I just hear you uncorking the Chablis in the background. Oh my goodness. Patreon.com/ComicLab.
I didn't know Victoria's Secret came in XL.
Brad, you're being very generous with one X in front of that. Let's just say the chocolate has still been coming to the house, even in quarantine.
Yeah, thank goodness. Another thing we can thank the post office for.
Yeah, it's true. Well, I don't know what you're talking about, Brad.